Well, I mean, it sounds like you're taking a lot of that as metaphorical, so to speak. I mean,
No,
why
not at all.
What's your problem with evolution, then, is what I'm not really understanding.
No, we're taking it literal, not metaphorical. We're simply pointing out is that the literal definitions of the Hebrew words are not the same as the literal definitions of some of the English translations. The problem you're facing here with translating from Hebrew into English is that in Hebrew you got very few nouns. So the nouns either have multiple literal definitions, or in this case, they have a very broad definition. Yet when you're translating into English, English has an enormous vocabulary, literally millions of nouns, and so you're kind of stuck with trying to pick one of those very specific nouns from a language where the term is far more generic than it would be in any of the English words you choose. Now, what's good about the English language compared to other languages is that we have about 16 different translations from the Hebrew. And so by looking at the different translations, you can get at least some idea, without knowing any Hebrew at all, that obviously the original word has a much broader range of definitions than what we see in the English. So the English reader can kind of figure this out without any background in Hebrew. But of course, the other good thing about being an English reader is you can go online and actually use your English words to key into the Hebrew, pop up a lexicon and see what it means for yourself, and also check the grammar.
Mm-hmm. But, and again, to go back to the Cambrian explosion, I'm not sure, again, I mean, how is that a problem for evolution like you guys were stating? I mean, it's like I said, there were several falsehoods presented about whether there were transitional fossils, what type of life was present before it. I mean, how...
Well, I've heard Fuzz speak on this. I mean, what he's pointing out is that the Cambrian explosion is where you see the sudden appearance of dozens of new phyla. And reptiles, birds, mammals, they're all part of the chordate phyla. So we're not saying that all the chordates show up at the Cambrian explosion. What we are saying is that chordates for the first time show up at the base of the Cambrian explosion. And then just to make it clear, I have some sympathy for biologists who say we have overwhelming proof that evolution is true. I would agree. There's an overwhelming case that life has been here for billions of years, and it has progressed from simple to complex. The issue of debate is what's responsible for this evolution or change in the history of life on planet Earth. And that's where I think all sides agree, hey, that's not pinned down yet scientifically. We've still got a lot more to learn, but there's no doubt that life has been here for 3.8 billion years and that we've seen a progression from simple to complex. And also we see that there's a relatedness amongst all life. From our creation perspective, we would say that relatedness is explained by a creator who is repeating his optimal designs over and over again. Therefore, we're not at all surprised that we see all this commonality, the DNA of life, and relationships amongst life in that context. A wise creator is going to use repeated designs. And this kind of brings... Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but so you believe that we do share common ancestors, or that there is common ancestry, or just that the features that we're pointing out as the same are due to, same God, same design?
Well, two things that there's not a lot of light on this in the Bible, but there's one passage you can go to is Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And it's simply referring to human beings. And what it says of the man is that God made him from the dust of the earth. So evidently he took the raw materials of the universe and put together this human being. But when it comes to Eve, it says that God took a biopsy from his side. So that would give him a DNA template. He could adjust the template and come up with a woman. So that shows you two ways from a biblical perspective that God could make new species. He can make it from scratch, from the material in the earth, or he can take pre-existing life and use that as a template, make the appropriate adjustments, and you got a new species. But in either way, pardon me?
Okay. Oh, I was just to say, or he could just use a system that he set up, which would be evolution, which is, again, indicative by the common descent and all the evidence supporting it that doesn't necessarily contradict what you're saying. I mean,
well, I would agree with that, but I would say we can put all these ideas to the test, and that's something we've been talking about on this Creation Update program. Is that we have the theistic evolutionary perspective that God uses evolution and common natural descent as the way to make the new species, or does He miraculously intervene by one or two or three different means? There are experiments you can conduct to put that to the test. And I think Fuzz has got a 3-page article up on our website where he talks about this experiment done at Michigan State University with E. coli bacteria, where they actually tried to determine whether Stephen Gould was right about evolution not repeating itself, or whether Simon Conway Morris was right that there's some hidden law of physics that would cause naturalistic evolution to produce these repeated outcomes. But we argue that experiment actually shows, number one, that Stephen Gould is right. Evolution will not repeat. And Conway Morris is wrong that there's some kind of hidden law of physics. Nevertheless, Conway Morris is right in that what we see in the record of nature are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of repeated design outcomes. And this experiment done at Michigan State University shows that where we should see it most powerfully at a naturalistic level, we don't.
So you believe that whenever a new species is created, that there's intervention there by God?
Well, it depends on your definition of a species. I mean, biology is not like physics.
Can't reproduce viable...
Now, the point I'm getting at is that if you look at the scientific literature, and again I'm quoting Fuzz, he counted 16 different definitions of what a species is. Some of those definitions are kind of like defining a genus. Other definitions are simply describing a breed. And so when you make the claim that, hey, we've produced a new species, which definition are you talking about? And the bottom line is, clearly we do see microevolution. We're not seeing macroevolution. And what we're trying to do in the biological realm is try to find that boundary between the micro and the macro. And that's still under debate. Biology is, again, not like physics. It's complex. The error bars are large. We're still trying to determine. And, from a biblical perspective, again, there's quite a bit of latitude on what the Bible will permit in terms of different explanations of the changes that are taking place in the record of nature. And a lot more latitude for the purely physical life than for life that would be like birds and mammals, capable of nurture, forming relationships, not only with members of their own species, but members of other species, and then human beings who are not only soulish and physical, but also spiritual. And so the Bible does make very strong claims about the miraculous interventions necessary to produce all the features we see in the human species and in birds and mammals, but has a lot of room for what would be taking place for the lower life forms. So that explains why in the Christian community you have quite a range of models to explain the history of life on planet Earth, because the Bible permits a significant range.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I believe that evolution is one of those.
Well, there are Christians out there who take a theistic evolutionary perspective where they claim that God performed all of his miracles at the beginning of the origin of life, and then is allowing natural process to do everything else thereafter. It reasons to believe we take a different position. We're not saying there isn't that kind of evolution going on, but we're saying it can't explain the entire record of life here on planet Earth. You do need miraculous interventions, especially for the higher life forms.
Well, like exactly where is it needed other than, I take it that you believe that humans have a soul, and while that's not exactly scientific, I agree with you, and I think that, that's more of an issue of, yes, you would need miraculous intervention there because that's hardly something that can be selected on. But other than that, exactly where is it needed? The evidence for common ancestry is so strong, and it's not necessarily same gene, same God, it's a matter of the pattern. And that pattern is exactly how, for example, let's say that I have a patient that comes to me with an idiopathic oral infection, and I don't know exactly what's causing it. I can send it back for cultures and, send it to the lab. They can't come up with anything. What happens next is something called 16S ribosomal typing, which relies solely on evolution, placing that organism that we don't know what's causing this infection on the evolutionary tree. And only through placing it on the tree, which you guys say doesn't exist, is how we can determine what causes it and use evolution to treat them.
No, we're not denying that there isn't a relationship amongst all life. We're not denying that you can build some of these trees. What we're saying is, what is the cause for the relatedness that we see in the record of nature? More importantly, what kind of scientific tests can we develop to determine which of the different hypotheses that are out there are correct and which are wrong? And, again, we do have other callers here, so
and one thing along with that, though, is you're pointing out an area where we have actually argued that that's the area where this sort of common ancestry and ability of animals or of organisms to kind of evolve and change from one another. It's on the biologic or on the bacterial level where you've got enormous populations, relatively small body sizes. That's where you're doing that. We've actually argued that that's where that sort of mechanism might be proficient, but there's clearly you get up to very large-bodied organisms with very small or long generation times and relatively small populations. That's where this naturalistic process we believe is going to have problems, and so we're looking for the test that would distinguish how those two mechanisms might work and how we could determine which one is actually the most proficient.
Well, they also got things like molecular clocks and morphological clocks, and you can see how they're in sync or out of sync. There are a number of ways